If you're lucky enough to have a pension, there's a lot of things that you've got to think through. I'm going to go over a few specifics here in a minute, but just to give you an idea, there's certain things that you have to think through, like what is your multiplier? Oftentimes when it comes to a pension, they do something like taking your years of service that you've worked times the multiplier times, let's just say, your highest average 5-year salary. So that's one thing that they're looking at when it comes to the pension. You also have to ask the question, is there a cost of living adjustment or a cost of living increase? That's where each year they're going to give you potentially, 1% to 3%, or they'll just match whatever inflation is when it comes to the pension to help keep up with that. I was a firefighter for 8 years prior to getting into finance. And if I would have stayed on board, they got rid of the COLA. So by getting rid of the COLA or the cost of living adjustment there, I would have retired potentially at age 44. And let's just say that I got $60,000. $60,000 at 44 may not be bad at all, but $60,000 at 74 would be pennies. I wouldn't be able to afford a gallon of milk. Maybe that's a little extreme. But you get what I'm talking about here when looking at these different specifics. Then you've got to think through, what is your election? You have the option sometimes to just cash out, take the pension and run and just take your money. Then you've got the other options. If you're married, filing jointly, or you've got a spouse, you've got the idea of, what is the spousal benefit? Sometimes it's 100%. You take a lesser amount on your pension. Sometimes it's 75%. You take a little less, but not as much. Or sometimes maybe your spouse only gets 50%. Got to look at those things too. I'll go over that one a little bit more in detail in a minute. Let's just take a look here. I built this out, Retired Roger and Mrs. Retired Roger on Nest Egg. We're taking a look at the pension plans and the tax problems when it comes to a pension. Oftentimes you're hearing all the advisors right now, you should convert to Roth. You should convert to Roth. Well, what happens if you have a pension? Well, if you're retired, oftentimes you're going to retire potentially in a high tax bracket, the same tax bracket, or maybe even higher. And so in this scenario right here, you can see they're going to sustain, just a 15% bracket until the last few years of the plan. They're actually going to jump up into a 25% tax bracket in this scenario. So tax planning when it comes to the pension is going to be a real thing that you've got to think through, because you may have options like a 457 or a TSP or any of those things if you're saving now and not near retirement. Well, if you're doing that, start considering Roths, because the Roth option on that is going to allow you to have some tax-free dollars. Because if you retire and your tax bracket looks like this, there may not be the down spots that we see in a lot of retirement plans where you can do the conversions. Oftentimes people retire and their income goes down for a bit. We do some conversions to continue to just make sure that they're not going to get hit with a lot of high RMDs or required minimum distributions. What ends up happening with the pension, you get the income coming in. You also have Social Security income coming in. And then if you have a bunch of tax deferred dollars, as in this scenario here, they had $300,000 in tax deferred dollars, that's going to push it so that they're going to have a higher tax bracket later on. And there's really just not going to be the opportunity to do much. Now, when I talk about the conversions, let me just show you exactly what I'm talking about here, because we're going to take this to the tax strategies and we're going to look and we can see specifically, if we were to do conversions in this scenario, we're talking a 12 to 15% bracket. So only converting in the 15% bracket, you're going to save $47,000 in taxes overall over the whole time of the plan here. But you're actually going to have $66,583 less of tax adjusted ending dollars at the end of the plan. If we bump this up, we can say, hey, you know what? Let's go to the 22 to 25% bracket. Let's see what happens. Again, you're going to pay a little less tax, but you're going to have a lot less money at the end. So that's just one thing you're wanting to think about when it comes to the pension. The next thing you really want to think about is liquidity. When it comes to liquidity, some people aren't really thinking through this and they're saying, well, hey, I'm going to have my pension the rest of my life. I'm going to have Social Security and I'm good to go. What happens if, you have a major expense that you need? Where are you pulling from those scenarios? Now you're going to have to go back and maybe take a credit card or get a loan or do different things to make sure that you can cover those expenses. I'm talking things that will happen in retirement, like an air conditioner replacement down here in Florida. It gets super hot. Roof leaks, car replacement or a major car repair. What happens if you have kids and you want to help your kids out and they say, hey, Mom, Dad, I'm really in a tight spot here. If you have a pension, you don't have a lot of cash set to the side, that's something you got to think through. So I always encourage people that have pensions to make sure you're still saving elsewhere. Don't just be dependent only on the pension so that you can have the liquidity to do the things you want in retirement. And finally, really breaking this down, let's talk about an untimely death. Because when it comes to the pension, in different scenarios, you're going to have to look at this and you're going to say, hey, well, what happens if I were to pass early? Well, Retired Roger passes at 75 here. Then Mrs. Retired Roger only has a 68% probability of success. Reason for that, in this plan specifically, there is a cost of living adjustment. They have $300,000 extra in tax deferred dollars that they had saved, but the pension gets cut to 50%. So you've got to think through this, think through how you're going to plan for that and what's needing to be done. Now, these are just a few different things when it comes to the pension. There are a lot of people asking questions of pensions and wanting to learn about pensions and learn about their pensions specifically. If that's you, let me know in the comments. Let me see if I can come up with some other videos for you.